Hello everyone. I'm the Crime Teller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, relax, and let's delve into tonight's true crime stories. Case 1. Andrei Gajdar was not a man unknown to the authorities, nor to the complex emotional landscape of Martina's life. Their relationship had been a tumultuous tapestry, woven with passion and punctuated by bitter disputes, a pattern sadly familiar in fractured families. Court records hinted at a history of instability, with Gajdar's name appearing in connection with various grievances, including an eyebrow-raising domain name dispute from 2009 involving the major tourism company TUI. This seemingly trivial detail, an online protest domain bearing the name tsucks.com, registered by Gajdar, offered a subtle glimpse into a man capable of sustained, if unorthodox, campaigns of displeasure. He was known for his stubbornness, his conviction in his own righteousness, and a deeply ingrained distrust of authority. These traits, once perhaps dismissed as eccentricities, now took on a sinister hue in the chilling light of his children's disappearance. Martina had fought for custody, recognizing the inherent instability in Andrei, but the legal system, in its often imperfect wisdom, had allowed him visitation. It was during one such visit that he had simply melted away with the children. The initial days of the investigation were a maelstrom of frantic searching and desperate pleas. Martina's voice, hoarse from crying, echoed in every police station, every media interview. The police, accustomed to domestic disputes, quickly escalated the case to an international child abduction. Andrei Gajdar was now a wanted man, and the search for Martin and Dominika became a top priority for Slovakian authorities. But he was elusive, a phantom slipping through borders and jurisdictions. The global nature of modern communication, often a tool for connection, now served as Gajdar's shield. He was adept at using the internet, a fact that had been demonstrated by his previous online exploits. This digital savvy allowed him to navigate the shadows, leaving behind a trail of frustration for the investigators. Months bled into an agonizing year. The initial flurry of media attention dwindled, but Martina's resolve never wavered. She transformed her grief into a relentless campaign, contacting anyone and everyone who might offer a glimmer of hope. The children's faces, once vibrant with laughter, now stared out from faded posters, their innocent smiles a haunting reminder of what had been lost. The case of the Gajdar children became a stark symbol of the silent suffering of parents whose children are snatched away, a chilling narrative playing out in the quiet corners of Slovakia. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a sudden explosion of evidence, but a slow, painstaking untangling of digital threads. Investigators, working in conjunction with international law enforcement agencies, meticulously combed through online footprints, banking transactions, and any faint digital breadcrumbs Gajdar might have inadvertently left behind. His past online activities, while seemingly insignificant at the time, now provided a window into his methodology. He was cautious, but not infallible. It became clear that Gajdar, with the children in tow, had journeyed far from the familiar landscapes of Central Europe. Their trail, once lost, began to re-emerge in a distant, sun-drenched land, the United States. The children and their father were last definitively traced to New York in May 2011, a fleeting appearance before the trail once more went cold. It was a cruel twist of fate, a moment of tantalizing proximity, followed by renewed despair. Yet, this sighting, however brief, provided a critical piece of the puzzle. It confirmed their continued existence and narrowed the vast expanse of the globe into a more focused search area. The question remained: where had they gone after New York? Years passed, each one adding to Martina's torment. The children were growing up somewhere, experiencing life without their mother, without the familiar comforts of home. Was Andrei caring for them, or was he subjecting them to a life on the run, devoid of stability? The unknown was a constant, gnawing pain. The case, now dubbed one of the longest and most mysterious child abduction cases in Slovak criminalistics history, seemed destined to become a cold file, a tragic footnote in the annals of unsolved mysteries. Then, a new player entered the grim drama. David Puchovsky, a name that would become synonymous with hope for Martina. In February 2014, Puchovsky, a dedicated and tenacious investigator, took up the mantle of the missing Gajdar children. He approached the case with fresh eyes, armed with a blend of conventional police work and innovative digital forensics. He understood Gajdar's online habits, his tendency to operate in the digital realm. Puchovsky began a painstaking process of retracing every possible online interaction, every forum post, every faint ping in the vast digital ocean. The investigation led Puchovsky and his team to a remote, tropical paradise, a place where many seek anonymity and a fresh start, Panama. This was a land known for its lush rainforests, its bustling canal, and its sometimes lax approach to international law enforcement. There was a genuine fear that even if Gajdar was found, he might remain a free man, protected by the intricacies of local laws and the reluctance of some nations to extradite internationally wanted criminals to Europe. The team, operating with the utmost discretion, spent their initial days in Panama observing Andrei Gajdar and the children from a distance. They meticulously documented his routines, pinpointed his exact location, and gathered irrefutable evidence for the Panamanian authorities. They also sought the support of the local media, knowing that public pressure could be a powerful catalyst for action. The sight of Martin and Dominica, now older but still undeniably the children Martina had lost, was a profound and emotional moment for the investigators. They were alive, they were safe, and they were within reach. Finally, in December 2014, after more than 4 long and agonizing years, the moment arrived. Andrei Gajdar was arrested by Panamanian authorities. The shockwaves of his capture rippled across the globe, bringing an end to the protracted search. The legal battles that followed were complex, but the overwhelming evidence of child abduction, coupled with international cooperation and the tireless advocacy of individuals like David Puchovsky, ultimately led to Gajdar's extradition. In May, he was returned to Slovakia, where he faced justice for his actions. The reunion between Martina Gajdarova and her children was a moment of profound joy, a tearful embrace that transcended years of separation and unimaginable pain. It was a testament to a mother's unwavering love and the relentless efforts of those who refused to give up. The scars of their ordeal would undoubtedly remain, but the Gajdar children were home. Andrei Gajdar, the man who had stolen their childhood, now sat in a Slovakian prison, awaiting his sentence, a stark reminder that even in the most obscure corners of the world, and despite the most elaborate attempts to evade capture, justice, however delayed, can ultimately prevail. Case 2. His morning routine was typical: coffee, a quick scan of the local news, and a call to his mother, whom he adored. He spoke of plans for the day, a meeting he had scheduled, a lead he was chasing. He mentioned a potential story, something about local business dealings, but kept the details close, a professional habit. He was excited, on the cusp of something big, he felt. The afternoon saw Pavel, dressed in his characteristic blend of casual comfort and professional readiness, head out from his Brezno apartment. His destination, or at least his initial one, was a meeting arranged through a mutual acquaintance. The details of this meeting remained frustratingly vague, a dark void in the heart of the investigation that would follow. Witnesses later recalled seeing him near the town square, deep in conversation with an unidentified man, their exchange seemingly animated, though not overtly hostile. Then he vanished. Hours turned into a worried evening. Pavel's parents, Helena and Pavel Sr., grew increasingly concerned. He was meticulous about his schedule, and missing dinner, especially after promising to call, was entirely out of character. Initial calls to his mobile went straight to voicemail. A sense of unease settled over the Ripple household, a cold premonition that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, with no word from Pavel, his parents reported him missing. The initial police response, while prompt, lacked the urgency that the Ripple family felt in their bones. Missing adult cases, especially those without immediate signs of foul play, often begin as routine searches. But Pavel was no ordinary missing person. His journalistic pursuits, his delving into potentially sensitive local issues, immediately raised red flags for those who knew him best. As days bled into weeks, the police investigation began to intensify. It quickly became apparent that Pavel hadn't simply left. His car remained parked outside his apartment building, his personal belongings undisturbed. His computer, a treasure trove of his ongoing investigations, was meticulously examined. It revealed a web of contacts, half-written articles, and numerous digital breadcrumbs leading to local business figures and, more broadly, to the murky world of regional politics and finance. Among the names that surfaced repeatedly in Pavel's notes was Karol Mello, a prominent local businessman with a checkered past. Mello, known for his shrewd dealings and an almost impenetrable network of connections, had been linked to various controversies over the years, though nothing had ever stuck. He was a man who exuded power and intimidation, a figure some in Brezno regarded with a mix of respect and fear. Pavel, ever the intrepid reporter, had been diligently gathering information on Mello's alleged illicit activities, including suspected fraud and questionable land deals. The nature of Pavel's research, particularly his focus on Mello, became a significant line of inquiry for the investigators. The police questioned Mello, who maintained his innocence, claiming only a passing acquaintance with Pavel. His alibi for the day of the disappearance, while initially appearing solid, began to unravel under closer scrutiny. Discrepancies emerged, and his demeanor, initially calm, grew increasingly agitated. Yet, without concrete evidence, he remained just a person of interest. The investigation was a painstaking process, marked by false leads and frustrating dead ends. Police tracked Pavel's phone records, reviewed security footage from Brezno and surrounding areas, and interviewed countless individuals, friends, colleagues, sources, even casual acquaintances. The timeline of Pavel's last known movements was meticulously pieced together, but the crucial hours after his meeting remained a gaping hole. A breakthrough, albeit a chilling one, came when an anonymous tip led police to a remote, wooded area outside Brezno. There, partially concealed under a pile of branches, were some of Pavel's personal effects: a distinctive silver pen he always carried, a worn leather wallet with his ID, and a small, bloodied piece of cloth that forensic analysis confirmed belonged to him. The discovery sent a shiver down the spine of the community. This was no longer a simple missing person case. It was a probable homicide. The focus on Karol Mello intensified. Investigators delved deeper into his financial transactions, his associates, and his movements on the day Pavel disappeared. They uncovered a pattern of intimidation and threats against individuals who had crossed Mello in the past. It became clear that Pavel, in his relentless pursuit of truth, had stumbled upon something deeply compromising to Mello's operations. Forensic teams scoured the wooded area, but no body was found. The lack of a body, however, did not deter the determined investigators. They shifted their strategy, focusing on building a circumstantial case, relying on meticulous evidence gathering and the testimony of those who, now emboldened by the prospect of justice, began to speak. A key piece of the puzzle emerged when a former associate of Mello, a man named Marek Sulich, came forward. Sulich, burdened by guilt and fearing for his own safety, confessed to his involvement in Pavel's abduction. He claimed that Mello had orchestrated the kidnapping, intending to silence Pavel permanently. Sulich described how Pavel was lured to a remote location, overpowered, and then driven away in a vehicle. He implicated another accomplice, Miroslav Rys, a shadowy figure with a reputation for violence, who had a long-standing association with Mello. According to Sulich's chilling testimony, Pavel was taken to a secluded hunting cabin owned by Mello in the forest surrounding Brezno. There, he was interrogated, likely in an attempt to uncover the extent of his knowledge and his sources. The details of what transpired in that cabin were horrifying, hinting at a brutal struggle. Sulich maintained that he was present for only a portion of the ordeal, claiming he was ordered to leave before the final act. He provided details about the vehicle used and the general area where Pavel's body was disposed of, but the exact location remained elusive. Armed with Sulich's testimony, the police moved to arrest Mello and Rys. Mello, ever defiant, denied all allegations, portraying Sulich as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Rys, a man of few words, also denied involvement. The arrests, however, sent a shockwave through the local community, as many had long suspected Mello's hand in various shady dealings. The trial of Carol Mello and Miroslav Riss was a sensation, drawing national attention. The prosecution presented a compelling case, relying heavily on Sulich's testimony, the forensic evidence from the woods, and the extensive circumstantial evidence linking Mello to the disappearance. They painted a picture of a calculated murder, driven by Mello's desperate need to protect his illicit empire from Pavel's journalistic expose. The defense, however, aggressively attacked Sulich's credibility, portraying him as a liar and a manipulator. They argued that without a body, there was no definitive proof of death, let alone murder. The lack of Pavel's remains continued to be the defense's strongest card, casting a shadow of doubt that lingered in the minds of some. The jury, however, after weeks of emotional testimony and detailed arguments, ultimately found Carol Mello guilty of ordering Pavel Reipel's murder. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a victory for justice, yet a hollow one for the Reipel family. Miroslav Riss was also convicted for his role in the abduction and murder. Despite the convictions, the Reipel family's torment was far from over. Pavel's body had never been found. The forests around Brezno, vast and unforgiving, held their secrets close. For Helena and Pavel Sr., the absence of their son's final resting place meant there could be no true closure, no final goodbye. They continued their own tireless search, driven by an unwavering love and a desperate hope to bring their son home, even if only in spirit. The case of Pavel Reipel became a somber reminder of the dangers faced by journalists who dare to expose uncomfortable truths, particularly in communities where power and corruption intertwine. It highlighted the fragility of justice when confronted with the calculated ruthlessness of those who operate outside the law. And for the Reipel family, it became an enduring saga of loss, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of an elusive peace in the agonizing silence of an unsolved disappearance. The echoes of Pavel's final moments, the unanswered questions surrounding his fate, continue to haunt Brezno, a town forever marked by the chilling mystery of the journalist who vanished into the thin Slovakian air. Case 3. The humid air of Sokoto hung heavy on May 12, 2022, a Thursday that began like any other at the Shehu Shagari College of Education. Students bustled through the campus, their minds on lectures, exams, and the everyday rhythm of college life. Among them was Deborah Samuel Yakubu, a 200-level Christian student of home economics, bright-eyed and eager to make her mark. Deborah was known to her friends as diligent, focused, and someone who spoke her mind, a quality that, tragically, would become her undoing. She was a member of the Fellowship of Christian Students, a vibrant presence in her community, and, like many students, she was part of a WhatsApp group chat dedicated to academic discussions for her course. The WhatsApp group, a seemingly innocuous digital space meant for shared learning, had, over time, strayed from its academic purpose. It had become a forum for a mixture of educational notes and, increasingly, religious posts. Deborah, pragmatic and with an eye on her studies, found the constant influx of religious content distracting. She believed the group should be reserved for academic matters, a sentiment she voiced in a voice note to her classmates. Her words, though intended as a plea for focus on their studies, were interpreted by some as a direct critique, and worse, a blasphemous insult to Prophet Muhammad. The exact words she uttered would later become a subject of intense, often distorted, public discourse, but the core accusation was clear. Deborah had allegedly blasphemed. The accusation, whispered at first, then amplified through the digital grapevine of the WhatsApp group, quickly morphed into a furious roar across the campus. The collective outrage, fueled by misinterpretations and heightened religious fervor, began to coalesce into a terrifying mob. The very air seemed to crackle with an unseen tension, as students, largely Muslim, surged with an almost primal anger. Their faces contorted with fury, their shouts growing louder, demanding retribution. College authorities, sensing the escalating danger, tried to intervene. They moved swiftly to protect Deborah, ushering her into a security room within the campus, hoping to shield her from the swelling tide of fury. A taxi was even called, waiting outside the school gates, intended to whisk her away to the relative safety of a police station. But the mob's momentum was too great, their intent too singular. They were not to be reasoned with, nor deterred. The security personnel, outnumbered and overwhelmed, fired tear gas and warning shots into the air, desperate attempts to disperse the frenzied crowd. Their efforts were futile. The mob, a living, breathing entity of collective rage, pressed forward, their shouts of Allahu Akbar reverberating through the campus. They breached the security room, a terrifying wave engulfing Deborah. Her pleas, her last desperate question, "What do you hope to achieve with this?" were drowned out by the thunder of their hatred. Dragged out into the open, Deborah was subjected to a brutal, merciless assault. Stones rained down on her, each impact a testament to the mob's unbridled fury. Her body, once vibrant and full of promise, became a canvas for their savage justice. The stoning was not enough. In a horrifying climax, tires were thrown upon her, and then a match was struck. Flames leaped, engulfing her, transforming the scene into a horrifying spectacle. A video, raw and sickening, captured the unthinkable. A young woman burned alive, while some perpetrators proudly filmed themselves, one even boasting of his role in the atrocity. Christian students, witnessing the horror, fled the premises in terror, their lives suddenly and violently disrupted. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The inferno of Deborah's lynching sparked further unrest in Sokoto. Reports poured in of attacks on Christian sites. The Holy Family Catholic Cathedral, the Bishop Lawton Secretariat, and St. Kevin's Catholic Church were targeted, their windows shattered, their properties vandalized, and in some cases, partly burned. A community bus was destroyed, and even a new hospital complex under construction suffered damage. The city, already volatile, teetered on the brink of widespread religious conflict. The news of Deborah Samuel's brutal murder sent shockwaves across Nigeria and beyond. Condemnations poured in from religious leaders, human rights organizations, and international bodies. The Sultan of Sokoto, a revered figure in the Muslim community, denounced the act, calling for justice. Christian associations across Nigeria demanded swift prosecution of the perpetrators, urging the government not to resort to usual rhetoric, but to ensure accountability. The police investigation, however, was met with immediate challenges and public skepticism. While two students, Billy Aminu Aliyu and Aminu Hukunchi, were swiftly arrested in connection with the lynching, the charges leveled against them, criminal conspiracy and inciting public disturbance, drew widespread criticism. Many felt these charges were far too lenient for a crime of such horrifying brutality, carrying a maximum sentence of only 2 years. Human rights lawyers openly described the charges as an insult to Nigerians and to the parents of the deceased. The legal proceedings that followed only deepened the public's frustration. A team of 34 lawyers, led by Professor Mansour Ibrahim, stepped forward to defend the arrested students. Despite initial denials of bail, the legal process became a source of increasing concern. The prosecution's case seemed to falter, with reports emerging of non-showing of prosecution lawyers. Ultimately, the suspects were acquitted, a decision that ignited a firestorm of outrage and accusations of impunity. The collective anger that had fueled Deborah's death now simmered as a deep sense of injustice. The Deborah Samuel case laid bare the fragile fault lines within Nigeria's diverse religious landscape. It highlighted the dangers of mob justice, the persistent challenges of religious intolerance, and the complex interplay between secular law and Sharia law in the northern states. For Deborah's family, who had laid their daughter to rest in their village of Tunga Magaja, south of Sokoto, the pain was immeasurable, compounded by the lack of definitive justice. The burning image of Deborah, tragically silenced and consumed by an extremist mob, remains a chilling reminder of the devastating consequences when fanaticism triumphs over humanity and the rule of law. Her death became a stark symbol, igniting debates about freedom of expression, religious harmony, and the urgent need for accountability in a nation grappling with deeply entrenched societal and religious divisions. The embers of that horrific day, in May 2022, continue to glow, a painful testament to a life brutally extinguished and a justice system still struggling to rise to the challenge. Case 4. The day began like any other for 8-year-old Muhammad Amoyuri. He was on his way to primary school, a familiar route through the residential area of Skagatorp. Just before 8 a.m., his young life was violently cut short. He was attacked from behind on Asketon, a street he had likely walked countless times. The assailant, armed with a knife, inflicted multiple fatal stab wounds upon the child. Tragically, at almost precisely the same moment, 56-year-old Annalena Svensson was also making her way to work. Her path converged with that of the attacker near the scene where Muhammad had been murdered. Witnessing the horrific event, or perhaps the immediate aftermath, Annalena Svensson appears to have attempted to intervene or confront the perpetrator. For this brave act, she too was attacked with the same ferocity, suffering fatal stab wounds. The attacker, described by shocked witnesses as a man in his 20s wearing a distinctive beige knee-length jacket and a dark woolen hat, did not flee the scene in a panic. Instead, he was observed walking calmly away, dropping the murder weapon, a butterfly knife, and his cap in a nearby newspaper rack before disappearing. The seemingly random nature of the attacks, with no apparent connection between the two victims, compounded the horror and left investigators and the public struggling to comprehend the motive behind such a savage act. The alarm was raised quickly, and police soon descended upon the scene. The discovery of the two bodies, a young boy and a middle-aged woman, lying so close together, spoke of a sudden, brutal encounter. The immediate priority for law enforcement was to secure the crime scene and gather any potential evidence. Fortuitously, the perpetrator had left behind crucial clues: the discarded butterfly knife and the woolen cap. These items would prove to be cornerstones of the investigation, particularly the biological material they contained. The initial investigation was massive in scale, quickly becoming the second largest in Swedish history, surpassed only by the investigation into the assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme in 1986. Hundreds of police officers were involved, working tirelessly to canvass the area, interview witnesses, and follow up on every potential lead. The retrieved knife and cap were immediately sent for forensic analysis. Crucially, DNA was successfully extracted from both items, confirming they belonged to the perpetrator and, significantly, that the same individual was responsible for both murders. From the DNA evidence, forensic scientists were able to establish a partial profile of the killer. Early analysis suggested the suspect was male, of Northern European descent, likely had blonde hair, and was a smoker and snus user at the time. Witness descriptions, though varying slightly, generally corroborated the image of a relatively young man. Based on the brutality and randomness of the crime, investigators also theorized the perpetrator might be suffering from mental health issues. Despite having the killer's DNA profile, the case quickly hit a wall. A search of national and international DNA databases yielded no matches. This indicated that the perpetrator had no previous convictions that resulted in his DNA being collected and stored. The investigation expanded dramatically, involving extensive door-to-door inquiries, the collection of thousands of voluntary DNA samples from men in the Linköping area who fit the general description or lived near the crime scene, and countless interviews with anyone who might have seen something that morning. Over 9,000 interrogations were conducted, and more than 6,000 DNA samples were collected in this mass screening effort. Yet, despite these monumental efforts and the wealth of resources poured into the case, the killer remained elusive. The initial leads dried up, and the investigation, despite the best efforts of the dedicated officers, gradually went cold. For 16 long years, the Linköping double murder remained one of Sweden's most notorious unsolved cases. The lack of a breakthrough cast a long shadow over the city, leaving the families of Muhammad Amoyuri and Annalena Svensson in agonizing limbo, without closure or understanding. The police force, too, felt the weight of the unsolved crime, with generations of investigators reviewing the case files, hoping to find a missed clue or a new angle. During this period, forensic technology continued to evolve. While traditional DNA profiling using STR analysis had its limitations in cold cases without a suspect database match, new advancements in DNA sequencing and analysis began to emerge. The success of investigative genetic genealogy (IgG) in solving cold cases in the United States, most notably the Golden State Killer case in 2018, brought a new glimmer of hope to the Swedish authorities. IgG involves uploading a crime scene DNA profile to public genealogical databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA used by individuals tracing their family history. By identifying distant relatives of the perpetrator through shared DNA segments, genealogists can then construct family trees to narrow down potential suspects. The Swedish police, after careful legal consultation regarding privacy concerns and the use of genealogical databases, made the groundbreaking decision to utilize investigative genetic genealogy in the Linköping case. This marked the first time this technique would be applied to solve a violent crime in Sweden. The task was assigned to Peter Schalland, a genealogist with a proven track record. Working with the DNA profile from the crime scene, Schalland faced the challenge of working with a sample that was over 15 years old, potentially degraded, and of limited quantity. Advanced DNA analysis techniques, including whole genome sequencing and genotype imputation, were employed to create a sufficiently detailed DNA dataset for upload to genealogical databases. The breakthrough came when the crime scene DNA profile matched with several individuals in the public databases who were distant relatives of the perpetrator. This was the pivotal moment the investigation had been waiting for. Schalland, working meticulously with the DNA matches, began the painstaking process of building family trees, working backward in time from the known relatives. This involved poring over historical records, census data, and other genealogical resources to piece together the family structure of the unknown suspect. The process was complex and time-consuming, involving the construction of intricate family trees spanning hundreds of years. The initial matches were with relatively distant cousins, requiring Schalland to build out multiple branches of the family tree to find common ancestors and identify potential candidates. A keystroke of luck, or perhaps fate, occurred when a closer relative had uploaded their DNA information, significantly narrowing the search. This relative shared a significant amount of DNA with the perpetrator, indicating a closer familial relationship, specifically that of a first cousin once removed. This closer match allowed Schalland to focus his genealogical research on a specific branch of the family. By building the family tree downwards from the common ancestors, he was able to identify a limited number of individuals who could potentially be the perpetrator based on their age, sex, and geographical location around the time of the murders. This genealogical work eventually led to the identification of two brothers as strong candidates. With the suspects narrowed down to two brothers, the police could finally move towards obtaining confirmatory DNA samples. Discreet surveillance and further investigation were conducted to gather more information about the brothers. In June 2020, 16 years after the brutal murders, police approached the two brothers. A DNA sample was obtained from one of the brothers, Daniel Nyqvist, who was 37 years old at the time, placing him in his early 20s in 2004. Consistent with the initial profile, the subsequent DNA analysis was swift and conclusive. Daniel Nyqvist's DNA provided a 100% match to the DNA found on the murder weapon and the cap of the crime scene. The 16-year mystery was finally solved. The arrest of Daniel Nyqvist was followed by a swift and unexpected development. He confessed to the double murders almost immediately during his initial police interview. This was a significant surprise, given the length of time the crime had remained unsolved and the lack of any prior connection between Nyqvist and the victims. His confession provided chilling details about the events of that morning. He admitted to the unprovoked attacks, stating that he had been hearing voices instructing him to kill. He first attacked Muhammad Eerie, and then, when Annalena Svensson appeared, he attacked her as well. He described the attacks as random, with no specific motive targeting either victim. His confession corroborated the police's earlier theory that the perpetrator suffered from mental health issues. The legal proceedings followed. Daniel Nyqvist was charged with 2 counts of murder. Given the clear DNA evidence, his confession, and the psychiatric evaluations that supported his claims of severe mental health issues at the time of the crimes, the focus of the trial shifted to his mental state and culpability. On October 1st, 2020, Daniel Nyqvist was found guilty of the 2 murders. However, recognizing his severe mental disorder, the court sentenced him to indefinite psychiatric care instead of a traditional prison sentence. He was also ordered to pay compensation to Muhammad Amouri's family in the Swedish state. The solving of the Linköping double murder through investigative genetic genealogy was a landmark case in Sweden and Europe. It demonstrated the immense potential of this technology in resolving long-standing cold cases and bringing perpetrators of violent crimes to justice when traditional methods have been exhausted. The case highlighted the ethical considerations surrounding the use of genealogical databases for law enforcement purposes, sparking discussions about privacy and the balance between solving crimes and protecting individual genetic information. Beyond the technical and legal aspects, the resolution of the Linköping double murder brought a form of closure to the families of Muhammad Amouri and Annalena Svensson after years of waiting. While the pain of their loss could never be erased, knowing who was responsible and understanding the tragic circumstances, however disturbing, allowed for a degree of peace and the possibility of moving forward. The case stands as a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the evolving power of science in the pursuit of justice, turning a 16-year-old cold case into a solved mystery. Case 5. The roots of the scandal lie in a sophisticated gold smuggling operation that allegedly ferried vast quantities of gold into Nepal, primarily from Dubai, using Tribhuvan International Airport TIA in Kathmandu as a key transit point. This was no small time, but a highly organized syndicate with tentacles extending from the carriers who physically transported the gold to businessmen who financed the operations and, allegedly, corrupt officials who facilitated its passage through customs and security. The sheer volume of gold believed to have been smuggled by this group over several years, estimated to be in the quintals, underscores the scale of their illicit activities. The orchestrator, or at least the most prominent figure to emerge from the shadows of the syndicate, was Chudamani Upreti, better known as Gore. Described as the alleged mastermind, Gore ran a tight ship, relying on a network of trusted individuals to ensure the smooth flow of illicit gold. The gold, often in biscuit form, was typically smuggled through TIA, bypassing official channels with the alleged complicity of airport and customs personnel. From Kathmandu, the gold would then likely be distributed within Nepal or smuggled onwards to India, where demand and price differentials made the trade highly lucrative. The specific consignment that triggered the public unraveling of this network was 33 kilograms of gold that arrived at TIA in January 2018. This particular shipment, like many before it, was intended to be whisked away from the airport without detection. However, something went wrong. Reports suggest the gold disappeared after being cleared from customs, allegedly intercepted by a rival group or perhaps even members within Gore's own syndicate. The precise circumstances of this initial disappearance remain one of the enduring enigmas of the case. The loss of such a significant quantity of gold sent shockwaves through the criminal network. For Gore and his associates, this wasn't just a financial blow. It was a threat to their operational integrity and a potential liability. Suspicion quickly fell upon those involved in the transportation and handling of the lost consignment. Among them was Sanam Sakia, a resident of Relabari, Morang, who was reportedly involved in carrying the smuggled gold for the syndicate. What followed was a horrific act of retribution that brought the clandestine world of gold, smuggling, crashing into the public consciousness. Believing Sakia was responsible for the missing gold, Gore and his accomplices allegedly abducted him. In the days that followed, Sakia was subjected to brutal torture in an attempt to extract a confession and recover the lost gold. Tragically, Sanam Sakia succumbed to his body was discovered in a vehicle in Biratnagar in March 2018. Sanam Sakia's murder was the critical turning point. What the perpetrators intended as a brutal message to their own ranks instead ignited a firestorm. The local police in Morang, investigating the murder, quickly realized that Sakia's death was not an isolated incident, but was intricately linked to a large-scale criminal operation. This realization marked the beginning of a sprawling investigation that would go far beyond a single murder case. As the police delved deeper into Sakia's death, the trail led them to the missing 33 kilograms of gold and subsequently to the wider smuggling network. The initial investigation in Morang, however, soon revealed the complexities and potential high-level connections of the syndicate. The sheer volume of gold involved and the apparent ease with which it transited through a seemingly secure international airport suggested insider involvement at various levels. Recognizing the magnitude of the case and the potential implications, the Nepalese government formed a high-level probe committee to conduct a comprehensive investigation into both Sonam Sakya's murder and the extensive gold smuggling racket. This committee, comprising senior officials from various government agencies, was tasked with uncovering the full scope of the operation, identifying all those involved, and bringing them to justice. The investigation by the Special Probe Committee was rigorous and far-reaching. They began by meticulously piecing together the events leading up to Sakya's death, which quickly exposed the hierarchy and operational methods of Gore Syndicate. Testimonies from individuals linked, however peripherally, to the group began to paint a picture of a well-oiled machine that had been operating for years, raking in enormous profits. One of the key figures identified early in the investigation was Gore himself. As the alleged ringleader, his arrest became a priority. The investigation also started to uncover the roles of other key players, including those involved in the logistics of smuggling, the financing of the operations, and the crucial element of facilitating the gold's passage through TIA. Names of alleged carriers, businessmen suspected of investing in the smuggled gold, and individuals working within the airport ecosystem began to surface. A significant challenge for the investigators was the clandestine nature of the operation and the fear it instilled in those who might have information. The brutal murder of Sonam Sakya served as a grim reminder of the syndicate's ruthlessness. Nevertheless, the probe committee, armed with state authority, pressed on, gathering evidence, conducting raids, and apprehending suspects. The investigation started to reveal the alleged complicity of individuals in positions of authority. This was one of the first major surprises of the case, although perhaps unsurprising to a populace long accustomed to rumors of corruption. Reports emerged suggesting the involvement of police officers and customs officials who allegedly turned a blind eye or actively assisted the smugglers in exchange for bribes. This alleged institutional support was crucial to the syndicate's longevity and success in operating on such a massive scale. As the investigation progressed, the number of individuals implicated grew significantly. What began as a murder inquiry expanded into a massive criminal case involving dozens of defendants facing charges related to murder, kidnapping, organized crime, and gold smuggling. The probe committee's report, when submitted, reportedly listed a large number of individuals, highlighting the extensive reach of the criminal network. However, the investigation was not without its controversies and frustrations. One of the most significant challenges was the failure to recover the missing 33 kilograms of gold that had set off the chain of events. Despite extensive efforts, the gold simply vanished, its whereabouts remaining unknown to this day. This missing gold fueled speculation and theories, adding another layer of mystery to an already complex case. Some believed the gold had been quickly melted down and circulated, while others suspected it had been moved out of the country. Another surprising and highly controversial aspect of the investigation and subsequent legal proceedings was the treatment of some of the accused, particularly those in positions of power or influence. While numerous individuals, including alleged carriers and lower-level operatives, were arrested and faced trial, there were allegations of political pressure and interference in the investigation. A key moment in the legal process was the trial at the Morang District Court. The court proceedings were closely watched by the nation, eager to see justice served and the full truth revealed. In a significant development, the court sentenced several individuals, including Chudamani Upreti Gore, to life imprisonment for their roles in the murder of Sonam Sakya and other related crimes like kidnapping and hostage-taking. This was a crucial step in holding the most prominent figures accountable for the violence that brought the scandal to light. However, the court's verdict also brought a major surprise and sparked widespread public outcry. The acquittal of several police personnel who had been implicated by the probe committee for their alleged roles in facilitating the smuggling. This decision raised serious questions about the integrity of the investigation and the justice system's ability to hold powerful individuals accountable. Critics argued that the acquittal of police officials suggested that the deeper, more powerful connections of the smuggling network remained untouched. Further adding to the mystery and fueling public distrust was the fate of the High-Level Probe Committee's report. Despite its extensive findings and recommendations, there were reports that the report was not fully implemented, and at one point, even went missing from government records. This lack of transparency and apparent reluctance to act on the report's findings reinforced the perception that powerful forces were working to protect those involved in the gold smuggling network. The 33 kilograms gold scandal also brought to light the estimated scale of the syndicate's operations prior to the discovery. Based on evidence gathered, the probe committee reportedly concluded that this network had smuggled an astonishing amount of gold, potentially totaling around 38 quintals, 3,800 kilograms, over several years. This revelation underscored the deep-seated nature of the problem and the massive financial gains reaped by the perpetrators. The investigation into the 33 kilograms case also highlighted the methods used by smugglers. Gold was often concealed within legitimate cargo to evade detection. The involvement of airport staff and customs officials was crucial to bypassing security checks. The use of carriers or mules to transport the gold, often ordinary individuals lured by the promise of quick money, was a common tactic. The aftermath of the 33 kilograms scandal has seen ongoing efforts to combat gold smuggling in Nepal. However, the scale and frequency of subsequent gold seizures suggest that the problem persists, indicating that while some members of the 33 kilogram syndicate may have been brought to justice, the underlying networks and enabling factors may not have been fully dismantled. Recent gold smuggling cases continue to surface, sometimes with alleged links to politically influential individuals, echoing the concerns raised during the 33 kilograms investigation. In conclusion, the 33 kilograms gold smuggling scandal was a watershed moment for Nepal, exposing a deeply entrenched criminal network operating with audacious impunity. The actions of the perpetrators, driven by greed and a belief in their untouchability, led to a brutal murder that inadvertently pulled back the curtain on their illicit world. The investigation that followed was a complex and challenging process, revealing the vast scale of the operation and the alleged involvement of individuals at various levels, including within state institutions. Key moments included the discovery of Sanam Sakya's tortured body, which triggered the wider probe, the identification and eventual arrest of alleged ringleader Gore, the extensive work of the High-Level Probe Committee in mapping the network, and the court's sentencing of several individuals for murder and related crimes. However, the case was also marked by significant surprises and disappointments, particularly the mysterious disappearance of the 33 kilograms of gold itself, the controversial acquittal of police officials, and the apparent failure to fully implement the findings of the official investigation report. Case 6. Christopher's short life was marked by escalating abuse at the hands of his stepfather. While the precise day-to-day horrors he endured may never be fully known, court proceedings and subsequent accounts revealed a pattern of severe physical violence. The abuse was not a sudden, isolated incident, but a horrifying trajectory that tragically culminated in his death. Evidence presented later indicated that Christopher suffered repeated beatings, resulting in a multitude of injuries over time. These weren't minor bruises. They were significant injuries that should have immediately raised alarm bells. The fatal injury that claimed Christopher's life was a severe blow to the head, causing massive head injuries and a skull fracture. This injury was inconsistent with the explanations provided by his mother and stepfather, who claimed they found him lifeless in bed and suggested theories like accidental falls or even self-inflicted injury. The presence of paper stuffed in his nose and mouth at the time of his death added a disturbing and perplexing layer to the initial scene. The initial response to Christopher's death was, in hindsight, tragically inadequate. Despite the suspicious circumstances and the severity of his injuries, the local police investigation was seemingly cursory. Alarming signs that had been present before his death were not properly heeded or investigated. The case was, astonishingly, closed twice by the local police, who seemingly accepted the explanations offered by the adults in Christopher's life. This initial failure to recognize and act upon the clear indicators of abuse became a central point of criticism and a driving force behind the later reopening of the case. Several factors contributed to this initial investigative failure. There were suggestions of a lack of experience, or specialized knowledge within the local police regarding complex child abuse cases. The initial focus may have been too narrow, perhaps overly reliant on the narratives provided by the immediate family, without sufficient critical examination or corroboration from other sources. The possibility of suicide in an 8-year-old, a theory reportedly entertained early on due to the paper in his airways, highlights a potential failure to consider the most likely scenario in cases of severe injury to a child that have inflicted harm by a caregiver. Furthermore, there were later accusations that the initial investigation lacked thoroughness in gathering forensic evidence and interviewing potential witnesses beyond the immediate household. However, the silence surrounding Christopher's death was not absolute. There were individuals who had observed concerning signs prior to that tragic February day. School personnel, in particular, had noted injuries and changes in Christopher's behavior. Reports from the school, detailing their worries about the boy's well-being and the visible marks of injury he sometimes bore, were tragically not acted upon effectively by the relevant authorities at the time. These missed opportunities for intervention were a crucial and painful element of the case's history. The school's concerns, while seemingly reported through the appropriate channels at the time, did not trigger the urgent and thorough response that was needed to save Christopher's life. The turning point in the Christopher Sakin came about not through a breakthrough in the initial local investigation, but through external review and persistent questioning. The case being closed twice, despite the evident trauma Christopher had suffered, raised red flags at a higher level within the Norwegian justice system. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Riksadvokaten, played a critical role here. Upon reviewing the details of the case and the basis for its dismissal, the Riksadvokaten ordered the investigation to be reopened, recognizing that the initial handling had been insufficient and that there was a strong suspicion of foul play. The decision by the Director of Public Prosecutions to mandate a new investigation was a pivotal moment and, in a sense, a surprise given the earlier dismissals. It signaled a recognition that a serious injustice might have occurred and that the system had failed Christopher. This intervention from the highest level of prosecution underscored the severity of the initial errors and the need for a more rigorous examination of the circumstances surrounding his death. The reopened investigation was conducted with a renewed focus and a more critical lens. Investigators began to meticulously re-examine the evidence, including the crucial autopsy findings. The forensic pathologist's report, which detailed the extent and nature of Christopher's injuries, became central to the prosecution's case. The massive head trauma and skull fracture were inconsistent with accidental causes and strongly indicative of severe force. The autopsy also likely provided insights into the age and nature of other injuries Christopher had sustained, painting a grim picture of prolonged abuse. The presence of paper in his airways, initially perhaps a source of confusion or support for a suicide theory, was likely re-evaluated in the context of a violent struggle or an attempt to silence him. The reinvestigation also involved re-interviewing witnesses, including school personnel, family members, and anyone else who may have had contact with Christopher and observe his condition. The concerns previously raised by the school, which had been seemingly downplayed, now took on greater significance. These testimonies, combined with the compelling forensic evidence, began to build a strong case against the individuals responsible for his care. The investigation faced challenges, including the passage of time since Christopher's death and the potential degradation of some evidence. However, the determination to uncover the truth and the clear medical findings provided the necessary impetus. A key breakthrough was likely the reinterpretation of the evidence through the lens of inflicted trauma, moving away from the initial, less plausible explanations. The focus shifted decisively to the home environment and the actions of the caregivers. Ultimately, the evidence gathered led to the arrest and indictment of Christopher's stepfather. He was charged with causing Christopher's death through repeated physical abuse. The case proceeded to trial. The court proceedings were undoubtedly emotionally charged. The prosecution strategy centered on presenting the overwhelming medical evidence of severe and repeated trauma, directly contradicting the defense's claims of accidental death. Expert witnesses, particularly forensic pathologists, played a crucial role in explaining the nature of Christopher's injuries and why they were inconsistent with the narratives provided by the defense. The prosecution likely also presented testimony from school personnel and potentially other witnesses who had observed signs of abuse. The defense, on the other hand, likely attempted to maintain the narrative of accidental death or portray Christopher as a child prone to self-harm or accidents due to behavioral issues, a common tactic in such cases to deflect blame. They would have challenged the interpretation of the forensic evidence and attempted to undermine the credibility of witnesses who spoke of prior concerns. Case 7. The series of crimes began subtly, with individual disappearances that, at first, might not have seemed connected. However, as precious time passed, and more young people vanished from the vibrant Chinese community in La Carrera, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Between 2010 and 2011, Yesenia Argelis Liu Cam, Yong Jianwu, Sami Zheng Chun, Joel Mario Liu Wang, and Georgina Del Carmen Li Chun were reported missing by their increasingly distraught families. The disappearances, spread across this period, created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, fueling rumors and anxieties within the close-knit community. The initial investigation was challenging, lacking immediate witnesses or clear motives. However, as police delved deeper, they started to connect the dots between the missing individuals. A critical element that emerged was the chilling reality of ransom demands being made to the families, transforming missing person cases into probable kidnappings for profit. This shifted the focus of the investigation, and authorities began to work on identifying those responsible for these calculated abductions. The breakthrough, though a horrific one, came with the discovery of the victims' bodies. They were found buried beneath the floor of a residence in the El Trapiquito sector of La Carrera. This grim discovery confirmed the family's worst fears and revealed the true, tragic nature of the disappearances. They were murders. The scene itself spoke to the perpetrator's intent to conceal the crimes, undertaking the macabre task of burying the victims on the property. The painstaking work of forensic analysis and linking the evidence from the burial site with the ongoing investigation into the kidnappings began to narrow the focus. Information gathered from the ransom attempts, coupled with local intelligence, eventually led investigators to Gilberto Ventura Ceballos. It was understood that he had been operating a cell phone business in the area, potentially providing a cover for his criminal activities and a means of interacting with the victims or their families. Facing compelling evidence, Ventura Ceballos was apprehended. Reports indicate his initial capture occurred in the Dominican Republic, from where he was extradited to Panama in 2011 to face charges of kidnapping and murder. His apprehension brought a temporary sense of relief to a community scarred by the violence. But the legal battle for justice was just commencing. The judicial process, however, proved to be protracted and fraught with unexpected turns. While in custody, awaiting trial, or having been convicted, details regarding the precise legal stage at this point can be complex. Gilberto Ventura Ceballos demonstrated a remarkable and alarming ability to circumvent the security measures in place. In a shocking turn of events on December 28, 2016, Ventura Ceballos successfully escaped from La Juita prison, one of Panama's major penal institutions located on the outskirts of the capital. This escape triggered a nationwide alert and a massive manhunt, exposing significant vulnerabilities within the prison system and drawing widespread public criticism. The ease with which a high-profile suspect in a serial murder case vanished from custody raised serious questions about corruption or gross negligence within the correctional facility. For several months, Ventura Ceballos remained at large, a fugitive on the run. Authorities across the region were alerted. The extensive search efforts finally paid off on September 22, 2017, when he was recaptured in neighboring Costa Rica. During his time as a fugitive, he had reportedly taken measures to alter his appearance, including dyeing his hair, and was living under an assumed identity, working in an auto repair shop. His recapture, though a testament to cross-border cooperation, did little to fully quell the public's unease regarding prison security. Following his extradition back to Panama, the legal proceedings against Ventura Ceballos continued. In July 2018, he was convicted of the kidnapping and murder of the 5 young individuals from La Carrera and received a sentence of 50 years in prison. This substantial sentence reflected the severity of his crimes and the profound impact they had on the victims' families and the wider Panamanian society. However, Reports later indicated that this sentence was reduced to 30 years, a development that may have been the result of legal appeals or conditions related to his extradition agreement with the Dominican Republic. Just over 2 years after his conviction and serving his sentence, Gilberto Ventura Ceballos once again managed to escape from prison on February 3, 2020. This second escape, reportedly from the Megajoya facility within the same complex as La Joyita, was perhaps even more audacious and concerning than the first. It immediately ignited a firestorm of public anger and led to high-level repercussions, including the reported resignations or dismissals of the Minister of Security and the Interior Minister. The repeated failure to keep such a dangerous individual incarcerated intensified scrutiny on the structural problems and potential corruption within the Panamanian prison system. A frantic second manhunt was launched, with authorities offering a significant reward for information leading to his capture. The public, already unnerved by the first escape, watched anxiously. Fortunately, this period of heightened alert was relatively brief. After just 10 days on the run, Gilberto Ventura Ceballos was recaptured on February 13, 2020, in the province of Chiriquí, near the Costa Rican border. While his swift recapture provided a measure of relief, the fact that he had managed to escape a maximum security prison for a second time in just over 3 years left an indelible mark on the public consciousness and highlighted persistent systemic weaknesses. The case of the La Carrera murders and the subsequent saga of Gilberto Ventura Ceballos' escapes remain a somber reminder of the devastating consequences of violent crime and the critical importance of robust security measures within the justice system. The motive behind the brutal killings appear to be primarily financial, driven by the pursuit of ransom money. However, the cold-blooded nature of the crimes and the method of disposing of the bodies suggested a disturbing level of planning and disregard for human life. The involvement of at least one accomplice, Alcibiades Mendez, who was also convicted in connection with the case, further underscored the organized nature of their criminal activities. The surprise elements in this case were undoubtedly the successful escapes, which repeatedly allowed a convicted murderer to regain his freedom, albeit temporarily, causing renewed fear and questioning the efficacy of the correctional system. The Gilberto Ventura Ceballos case serves as a tragic illustration of the challenges in combating serious crime and the ongoing need for vigilance and reform to prevent such heinous acts and ensure that justice, once delivered, is securely upheld. Case 8. Imagine a criminal enterprise operating with chilling efficiency under the guise of legitimate business and opportunity. A network we shall refer to as the Shadow Network. Their predatory gaze fell upon individuals in regions marked by economic hardship and limited prospects, primarily young women from Eastern Europe and West Africa, though victims of various nationalities and genders are consistently identified in the Netherlands. The insidious process began not with force, but with manipulation and false promises, the initial phase of a criminal timeline built on deceit. Starting around, let's say, 2015, the Shadow Network's recruiters, often sharing ethnic or linguistic backgrounds with their targets, would infiltrate communities, building trust and exploiting the aspirations of those yearning for a better life. They would paint a seductive picture of the Netherlands, a land of opportunity, high wages, and social mobility. Vacancies for seemingly legitimate jobs, waitressing, domestic work, or roles in the cleaning sector, were advertised through word of mouth, social media, or seemingly innocuous local contacts. These were not mere job offers. They were carefully crafted traps, designed to lure victims into a web of dependency. Over the following months, the grooming process would deepen. Recruiters would cultivate relationships, becoming confidants and advisors, subtly isolating the victims from their usual support systems. They would facilitate the acquisition of travel documents, sometimes genuine, sometimes fraudulent, coaching the victims on how to navigate visa applications and border controls, all while downplaying or outright lying about the true nature of their journey and the costs involved. The victims, often operating under a significant information deficit and fueled by desperation for a better future, readily accepted the assistance, unknowingly incurring ever-increasing debts to the network. The transportation phase, typically occurring in the following year, perhaps 2016, saw the victims travel towards the Netherlands. This journey underscored the country's role as a transit nation, with victims potentially passing through several borders, often by bus, train, or budget flights, their movements meticulously orchestrated by the shadow network to avoid scrutiny. Upon arrival, usually at airports or bus stations, the veneer of opportunity would swiftly crumble, revealing the brutal reality. Their passports and any other identifying documents were immediately confiscated by members of the shadow network, a swift and effective tactic to strip the victims of their autonomy and ability to escape. The promised jobs evaporated, replaced by chilling demands. The timeline of exploitation that followed was a relentless cycle of control, fear, and degradation. In the initial weeks post-arrival, victims were typically confined to overcrowded, often squalid safe houses or apartments controlled by the network. Their communication with the outside world was severely restricted or monitored. Mobile phones were confiscated or replaced with monitor devices. The perpetrators wasted no time in asserting their dominance, using threats of violence, intimidation, and the stark reality of the victim's irregular immigration status to ensure compliance. The fabricated debts for travel and living expenses were constantly reiterated and inflated, creating a seemingly insurmountable financial burden that bound the victims to their exploiters. As the initial shock wore off, the true nature of their captivity became horrifyingly clear. For those trafficked for sexual exploitation, starting perhaps a month or two after arrival, they were forced into prostitution in various clandestine locations across the Netherlands. Hidden brothels, rented apartments advertised online, or even hotels. Their movements were tightly controlled, their interactions with clients monitored, and every cent they earned was seized by the network. The victims were left with nothing, constantly reminded of their debt and their powerlessness. Those trafficked for forced labor faced equally brutal conditions. They were sent to work in demanding, often dangerous jobs in sectors known for their vulnerability to exploitation, such as agriculture, construction, or the hospitality industry. Long hours, grueling physical labor, and hazardous environments were commonplace, all for little to no pay. Their living conditions were often appalling, and their freedom of movement severely restricted. The shadow network capitalized on the demand for cheap labor in certain sectors of the Dutch economy, effectively operating a parallel, illicit labor market. The perpetrators maintained control through a calculated combination of fear, isolation, and psychological manipulation. Victims were frequently moved between different locations to disorient them and prevent them from building relationships or understanding their surroundings. They were subjected to constant threats, not only against themselves but also against their families back home, a particularly potent form of coercion. The psychological toll was immense, as the traffickers systematically eroded their victims' self-worth and hope, making resistance seem futile. Access to medical care was often denied, and opportunities to learn the language or understand their rights were actively suppressed, further entrenching their dependency. The first cracks in the shadow network's operation, like in many human trafficking cases, likely appeared subtly, born from the vigilance of concerned citizens or the routine work of dedicated professionals. The investigation, a complex and lengthy undertaking, could have begun around 2017. Initial sparks are often varied. An anonymous tip to the police or a specialized anti-trafficking organization like Comensha, perhaps from a neighbor who noticed suspicious activity or a former victim who managed to escape. Routine police checks at locations suspected of harboring illicit activities could also uncover potential victims. Increasingly, collaboration with international law enforcement partners plays a crucial role, as these criminal networks rarely operate within a single country's borders. In this hypothetical case, let's envision a combination of these factors. A concerned citizen's anonymous call about unusual activity at a seemingly residential building, and a sharp-eyed social worker encountering a young woman exhibiting signs of severe distress and exploitation. These initial, seemingly disparate reports were crucial. They were likely channeled to specialized human trafficking units within the Dutch police force, teams comprised of detectives trained to recognize the often hidden indicators of exploitation. Preliminary investigations would have commenced discreetly, involving initial surveillance of the reported locations and attempts to identify individuals associated with the suspicious activities. This early phase, typically spanning several months, was focused on gathering initial intelligence without alerting the network. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, the investigation into the shadow network gained momentum, entering a more intensive phase of intelligence gathering and analysis, perhaps from late 2017 into 2018. This period was characterized by painstaking work and the deployment of various investigative techniques. Surveillance, both physical and electronic, played a crucial role, allowing investigators to map the movements of the perpetrators and identify the locations where victims were held and exploited. Financial analysis was also key, meticulously tracing the flow of money to understand the network's economic structure and identify the individuals benefiting from the criminal activity. This often proved to be a challenging but ultimately fruitful avenue of investigation, as illicit gains leave a financial trail. Interviewing potential witnesses presented significant hurdles. Neighbors might be hesitant to speak out due to fear, and even those with indirect knowledge might be unaware of the full extent of the criminality. Gaining the trust of potential victims was an even greater challenge, given the trauma they had endured and their deep-seated fear of their traffickers. Language barriers and the victims' often precarious legal status further complicated this crucial aspect of the investigation. In some instances, carefully planned and executed undercover operations might have been utilized to gather direct evidence of the exploitation and identify the roles of key perpetrators within the network. Given the international dimension of the shadow network, close collaboration with law enforcement agencies in the victims' countries of origin and in transit countries was essential to understand the recruitment process, travel routes, and the network's broader structure. The investigation was fraught with challenges and setbacks. The clandestine nature of human trafficking meant that concrete evidence of coercion and exploitation was often difficult to obtain. Perpetrators are adept at covering their tracks, using layers of intermediaries and constantly changing their methods. The legal complexities of prosecuting transnational crimes and coordinating efforts across different jurisdictions also presented significant hurdles. However, amidst these challenges, key moments and even surprises arose that propelled the investigation forward. Perhaps around mid-2018, a significant breakthrough occurred. Through persistent financial tracking, investigators identified a seemingly unremarkable individual, perhaps a seemingly legitimate business owner, who was receiving substantial and regular payments from various sources linked to suspected exploitation sites. This individual, previously not considered a major player, turned out to be a central figure in the shadow network's financial infrastructure, a surprising discovery that significantly altered the course of the investigation and provided a crucial link in the criminal chain. Another key moment, albeit a chilling one, came through intercepted communications that laid bare the network's brutal control tactics and the profound suffering of the victims. Hearing the despair and fear in their voices provided powerful confirmation of the severity of the crimes and fueled the determination of the investigative team. Then came a more immediate and dramatic surprise. Based on a credible tip-off corroborated by surveillance, a raid on a seemingly ordinary suburban house revealed a hidden, fortified area where several victims were being held in horrific conditions. This discovery, while deeply disturbing, provided irrefutable direct evidence of the exploitation and led to the immediate rescue and safeguarding of several individuals. It served as a stark and unexpected reminder of the extreme measures traffickers take to conceal their victims. With sufficient evidence meticulously gathered over many months, the time came to dismantle the shadow network. In a coordinated series of raids, likely conducted simultaneously across multiple locations in the Netherlands, law enforcement moved in to apprehend the perpetrators and secure the sites of exploitation. This complex operation required careful planning and seamless cooperation between various police units, including specialized tactical teams, and potentially involved coordination with international partners if key figures were located abroad. The result of the raids was the apprehension of several key figures within the shadow network, including the financial orchestrator and those directly responsible for the day-to-day control and exploitation of the victims. Crucially, a number of victims were rescued from their captivity. Immediately following their liberation, these individuals were provided with essential support services through specialized anti-trafficking organizations in the Netherlands, including safe shelter, medical attention, psychological counseling to address their trauma, and legal assistance to help them understand their rights and options. The legal process that followed was a critical phase in ensuring accountability for the perpetrators. The arrested individuals were brought before a judge, and formal criminal proceedings were initiated. Prosecutors embarked on the complex task of building a robust case, meticulously compiling and presenting the vast array of evidence gathered during the investigation: surveillance logs, financial records, intercepted communications, expert analysis, and, most powerfully, the testimonies of the victims themselves. Throughout the legal proceedings, which could span many months or even years, the defense attorneys for the accused traffickers likely employed various strategies to challenge the prosecution's case. These tactics often include attempting to discredit victim testimonies, arguing that interactions were consensual, a common and painful tactic in sex trafficking cases, or claiming a lack of knowledge about the true nature of the network's activities. This is a significant challenge in human trafficking prosecutions, as the trauma experienced by victims can sometimes impact their ability to testify consistently, and traffickers are skilled at creating situations that blur the lines of coercion. Key moments during the trial often revolved around the powerful and courageous testimonies of the victims who chose to speak out against their abusers. While emotionally harrowing for the victims, their first-hand accounts provided essential human context to the often technical evidence. Expert witnesses on human trafficking played a vital role in educating the court on the dynamics of control, manipulation, and coercion used by traffickers, helping judges and juries understand why victims may not have immediately reported their situation or attempted to escape. The presentation of irrefutable financial evidence by the prosecution, clearly illustrating the significant profits generated by the criminal enterprise, served to underscore the perpetrator's motive and the scale of their illicit activities. Unexpected turns could also arise during the trial, such as witnesses potentially recanting statements due to fear or pressure from associates of the network who remained at large, the introduction of new, unforeseen evidence, or surprising legal argument from the defense that required swift and effective counter-responses from the prosecution. Ultimately, after a thorough and complex judicial process, the court delivered its verdict. Based on the compelling evidence presented, several members of the Shadow Network were found guilty of grave crimes, including human trafficking, forced labor, and participation in a criminal organization. The sentencing phase reflected the severity of the offenses. Those individuals identified as the leaders of the network and those directly involved in the most violent or harmful acts of exploitation received substantial prison sentences, commensurate with the seriousness of human trafficking as a major crime in the Netherlands. Lesser sentences were imposed on those with more peripheral roles, reflecting the nuanced understanding of culpability within the criminal hierarchy. Financial penalties and asset forfeiture were also likely ordered, aiming to strip the perpetrators of the ill-gotten gains derived from their heinous activities. The conviction of key members of the Shadow Network represented a significant victory for law enforcement and a crucial step towards justice for the victims. It sent a clear message that human trafficking is actively combated in the Netherlands. For the rescued victims, the conclusion of the trial marked a critical point in their journey towards recovery and the possibility of rebuilding their lives free from exploitation. The specialized support services provided continue to be vital in their long-term healing process, offering assistance with housing, education, employment, and navigating legal and immigration procedures. However, the physical and psychological scars inflicted by their ordeal would undoubtedly require ongoing care and support. This case, while a representation, underscores the persistent challenge of human trafficking in the Netherlands and the unwavering commitment required from law enforcement, judicial systems, and support organizations to combat this deeply disturbing crime and protect the vulnerable from falling prey to its hidden chains. The fight is ongoing, a continuous effort to identify, dismantle, and prosecute these criminal networks and to provide hope and healing for those they have so cruelly exploited. Case 9. The discovery on March 19, 2010, was a scene of profound sorrow and unsettling mystery. Playing near a pond in Szczecin, a town nestled close to Poland's border with the Czech Republic, two young boys made a find that would send ripples of shock and grief across the nation. Partially submerged in the water was a sports bag, and inside, they found a lifeless body of a small child. The immediate realization was that this was no accident. The child bore injuries that spoke of violence. The Cheshire police were immediately faced with a daunting task: identifying the victim. The boy, estimated to be around 2 years old, was a Jane Doe, his short life having ended in unknown, violent circumstances. Investigators launched a wide-scale effort, circulating the child's description to police forces throughout Poland and in neighboring countries, hoping someone would recognize him or report a missing child matching his appearance. The media picked up the story, and the image of the unknown toddler found in the pond deeply affected the Polish public. In Cheshire, residents spontaneously created a memorial at the pond's edge, leaving flowers, candles, and toys as a tribute to the lost little boy. Despite these heartfelt public appeals and the diligent work of the police, weeks stretched into months, then over a year, and still, no one came forward. The absence of a missing person report for a child of this age was particularly alarming and a significant hurdle in the investigation, suggesting a deliberate effort to conceal the child's disappearance. Eventually, with all leads exhausted and the child still unidentified, the authorities arranged for his burial in Cheshire. He was laid to rest in a nameless grave, a poignant symbol of his unknown identity and the tragic mystery surrounding his death. The case, for a time, became a cold case, but the file remained open. The breakthrough, when it finally came in June 2012, was as unexpected as it was crucial. It originated not in Cheshire, where the body was found, but in Bedtime, a town over 60 kilometers away. A grandmother, concerned that she had not seen her 2-year-old grandson, Simon, who lived with his parents in Bedtime for an unusually long time, decided to report him missing. This seemingly delayed missing person report, filed 2 years after Simon was last reliably seen by extended family, immediately drew the attention of the Bedtime police. The timing and the child's age aligned chillingly with the details of the unidentified boy found in the Cheshire pond. Investigators in Bedtime began questioning Simon's parents, identified as Beata CH and Yaroslav R. Their initial responses to inquiries about their son were evasive and contradictory, fueling suspicions. As the police pressed for information regarding Simon's whereabouts, a disturbing picture began to emerge. It became apparent that the parents had been actively deceiving their family, neighbors, and potentially even social services into believing that Simon was still alive and well. Reports later surfaced suggesting they had gone to shocking lengths to maintain this facade, even allegedly using another young child, possibly a grandson from one of Beata's older children, to impersonate Simon during instances when his presence was expected. This calculated and prolonged deception was a deeply unsettling revelation and a major surprise in the unfolding case. Recognizing the potential link between the missing Simon and the unidentified boy from Cheshire, the police obtained DNA samples from Beata CH and Yaroslav R. The samples were sent for comparison with the DNA profile of the child found in the pond. The results were conclusive and confirmed the investigators' growing fears. The DNA matched. The unidentified boy from Cheshire was, unequivocally, 2-year-old Simon from Bedtime, and his parents were the very individuals who had reported him missing, albeit indirectly through his grandmother, after a 2-year delay. With Simon's identity confirmed, the focus of the investigation shifted dramatically to uncovering the full, horrific truth of what had happened to him. Beata CH and Yaroslav R. were taken into custody, under questioning, and confronted with the irrefutable DNA evidence and the inconsistencies in their stories. They eventually began to reveal the grim details of Simon's final days and their subsequent actions. The investigation uncovered a history of domestic violence within the family. While the specifics of the abuse were harrowing and revealed during the trial, it was clear that Simon had been living in a dangerous and abusive environment. The fatal injury that led to his death was a severe blow to the abdomen, which resulted in a ruptured intestine and the development of peritonitis, a painful and ultimately fatal infection. According to the parents' admissions and the evidence presented in court, the fatal incident occurred in February 2010, just weeks before Simon's body was discovered. Yaroslav R. admitted to striking the child in the abdomen, reportedly out of frustration over something minor like Simon's crying. Following this brutal act, Simon's condition rapidly deteriorated. He suffered immensely, exhibiting symptoms such as relentless crying, refusal to eat or drink, and diarrhea, clear indicators of severe internal injury requiring immediate medical attention. Appallingly, his parents chose not to seek any medical help for their gravely injured child. Driven by fear of the consequences of their abuse being discovered, they reportedly watched their son suffer and die over several agonizing days. Their failure to provide medical aid was a critical factor that sealed Simon's fate and underscored their chilling neglect and cruelty. After Simon succumbed to his injuries, Beata Ch. and Yaroslav R. made the conscious decision to conceal his death. In a cold and calculated act, they wrapped his small body, placed it in a sports bag, and transported it by car, along with their 2 other young daughters, to Chechen. There, under the cover of night, they abandoned the bag in the pond, hoping to dispose of the evidence and erase Simon's existence from their lives and from the official record. For the next 2 years, they maintained their elaborate deception. They continued to collect child benefits in Simon's name, lied to family members about his whereabouts, and, most disturbingly, allegedly used another child to pretend Simon was still alive when necessary. This intricate web of lies and manipulation was a significant obstacle for investigators and explained why Simon remained unidentified for so long and why no one closer than his grandmother raised the alarm effectively until much later. Once the parents were identified, the police investigation shifted to gathering evidence to support criminal charges. Forensic analysis of Simon's remains provided crucial evidence about the cause and nature of his injuries and the time of death. Interviews with the parents, though marked by initial denials and inconsistencies, provided details that, when corroborated with other evidence, helped reconstruct the timeline of the abuse and the cover-up. Testimonies from family members and neighbors who had been deceived further illustrated the parents' calculated efforts to hide the truth. The trial of Beata Ch. and Yaroslav R. drew intense public interest. They were charged with causing severe bodily harm resulting in death and with the desecration of a corpse. The prosecution presented a damning case, highlighting the brutal abuse, the failure to seek medical help, and the callous disposal of the body and subsequent deception. The defense likely attempted to argue for a lesser degree of culpability, but the overwhelming evidence of the child's suffering and the parents' deliberate actions made a conviction likely. The court found both parents guilty. Yaroslav R., deemed directly responsible for the fatal blow, received a sentence of 10 years in prison, while Beata Ch. was sentenced to 9 years. However, these initial sentences were appealed by the prosecution, who argued they were too lenient for the horrific nature of the crime. The Court of Appeal reviewed the case, and, recognizing the severity of the abuse, the prolonged suffering of the child, and the parents' actions, increased the sentences. Yaroslav R.'s sentence was raised to 15 years, and Beata's to 13 years, reflecting a stronger judicial condemnation of their actions. The case of Simon from Bedtime brought to the forefront the grim reality of domestic violence and child abuse in Poland. The fact that a child could suffer such brutal abuse and his death could be concealed for so long by his own parents was deeply shocking to the public. The case served as a tragic example of how domestic violence extends beyond adult relationships, often with devastating consequences for the most vulnerable family members. Public reaction was one of outrage and sorrow, prompting discussions about the need for better child protection mechanisms, increased public awareness of the signs of abuse, and the importance of community vigilance. While Simon's case was extreme, it tragically highlighted the statistics on child abuse in Poland, underscoring the fact that many children face violence within their homes. The Śmierć Simona case became a painful but necessary reminder of the societal responsibility to protect children and prevent such horrific tragedies from occurring. The memory of the boy from Bedtime serves as a lasting symbol of the devastating impact of domestic violence and the critical need for intervention to save vulnerable lives. Case 10. In the burgeoning, cobbled streets of early 20th century Copenhagen, a city wrestling with the shadows of industrial growth and the quiet desperation of its working poor, a sinister industry thrived in the dim corners of society: baby farming. It was a practice born of societal shame and economic hardship, a grim solution for unwed mothers and families unable to care for their illegitimate or unwanted children. Advertisements, often euphemistically worded, offered a loving home or discreet adoption for infants, promising a future that, for many, was brutally short. Amidst this clandestine network, a figure emerged, unremarkable in appearance but monstrous in her deeds, who would forever stain the annals of Danish crime with a horror almost beyond comprehension. Dagmar Johan Amalie Overby. Her name, now synonymous with a chilling chapter in Nordic history, once carried no particular weight. Born in 1887 in Assens, a modest town on the island of Funen, Dagmar Overby's early life offered few clues to the darkness that would later consume her. She was a woman of average height, with a plain face often described as stern, her eyes betraying little emotion. She had drifted through various employances, from a waitress to a shop assistant, before settling in Copenhagen, a city brimming with opportunities and, crucially, a ready supply of vulnerable mothers and their unwanted offspring. The societal pressures of the time were immense. A child born out of wedlock was a mark of shame, often leading to ostracization, job loss, and a life of destitution for the mother. Adoption, though an option, was complex and often unaffordable, leaving many desperate women with nowhere to turn. It was into this vacuum of despair that Dagmar Overby, with a cunning born of cold calculation, inserted herself. She established a maternity home, or adoption agency, in various apartments across Copenhagen, moving frequently between addresses like Engavevej, Vesterbrogade, and Kærleidsvej, leaving behind no lasting trail of her depravity. Her advertisements in local newspapers were deceptively warm, promising care and a loving environment, an irresistible lure for women whose options had dwindled to nothing but a terrifying abyss. The victims of Dagmar Overby were not individuals with long lives and complex stories, but fragile beings, barely given a name, often only a number in the macabre ledger of her crimes. They were newborns, innocent and utterly dependent, entrusted by their mothers to a woman who promised them a future, only to extinguish it within hours or days of their arrival. These mothers, driven by a cocktail of shame, poverty, and desperation, scraped together meager sums, typically between 12 and 100 Danish kroner, a significant amount for them, to secure their child's purported passage to a better life. They were women like the one who, in the spring of 1919, handed over her baby, a tiny boy, with tears in her eyes and a heart heavy with sorrow, believing she was giving him a chance she could not provide. Or the young servant girl, dismissed from her position due to her pregnancy, who saw Dagmar's advertisement as a beacon of hope in her darkest hour. Each child represented a mother's last, agonizing decision, a desperate gamble on an unknown woman's promise. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that many of these mothers, relieved but heartbroken, would later inquire about their children, only to be met with vague excuses, claims of rapid adoption, or simply silence. They were too ashamed, too powerless, or too afraid to push further, allowing Dagmar's dreadful enterprise to continue unimpeded. The infants themselves were nameless in the public record for years, only gaining a collective identity as Dagmar Overby's victims, a chilling testament to the scale of her atrocities. Their tiny lives, barely begun, were extinguished with a chilling efficiency, their bodies disposed of with a cold indifference that defied human understanding. Dagmar's modus operandi was horrifying in its simplicity and effectiveness. Once an infant was handed over and payment received, the child's fate was sealed. She did not seek adoptive parents. She sought only to eliminate the evidence of her transaction. The methods varied, but all were designed to be swift and silent. Some children were suffocated, their small airways blocked by a pillow or cloth. Others were drowned, their cries muffled by the water, their brief existence ending in a moment of terror. Still others were starved or neglected, their fragile bodies simply fading away from lack of care and nourishment. The disposal of the bodies was equally chilling. She reportedly burned some in her apartment stove, their small forms reduced to ash and bone fragments that she would then scatter. Others were reportedly buried in her garden. or even in the cesspool of her building, a stark and horrific symbol of the depths to which she had sunk. The smell of burning flesh, the constant movement of furniture, the occasional strange package. These were the subtle clues that, in a less desperate time, might have raised alarms. But in the crowded, anonymous tenements of early 20th century Copenhagen, where privacy was paramount and asking questions was seen as impolite, Dagmar Overby operated largely unnoticed. Her victims were those society had largely forgotten or wished to forget, making her dark work tragically easy to conceal. For years, she moved from address to address, her trail a faint scent of fear and unspeakable loss, leaving behind a wake of unimaginable grief and unanswered questions. The slow unraveling of Dagmar Overby's monstrous secret began not with a grand exposé or a diligent police investigation, but with the persistent, heart-wrenching insistence of a single mother. On August 27, 1920, Caroline Ageson, a woman desperate to retrieve her child whom she had entrusted to Dagmar a few days prior, arrived at Dagmar's latest address on Engavevej. Caroline had managed to secure some funds and, perhaps, had a glimmer of hope that her child might still be alive. When she arrived, Dagmar, employing her usual web of deceit, claimed the child had already been adopted. But something in Dagmar's demeanor, perhaps a flicker of unease or a slip in her carefully constructed lies, stirred a profound suspicion in Caroline. This was not the first time Dagmar had used this excuse, but Caroline, driven by a mother's instinct, refused to be placated. She demanded to see her child, or at least proof of his adoption. Dagmar, cornered, grew agitated, her calm facade beginning to crack. Caroline's unwavering demand, perhaps amplified by the desperation in her voice, finally pierced through the apathy of the building's other residents. The landlady, having grown increasingly suspicious of Dagmar's strange comings and goings, the faint, sickening odors that sometimes permeated the building, and the general air of secrecy around her lodger, finally decided to act. She advised Caroline to go to the police. What followed was an investigation that would shock Denmark to its core, exposing a level of depravity that few could have imagined. When the police arrived at Dagmar Overby's apartment on Engavevej, they found it unremarkable at first glance. However, the initial search quickly yielded disturbing evidence. Inside a trunk, hidden beneath linens, officers discovered the tiny, decomposed body of a baby boy, later confirmed to be Caroline Ageson's child. The horror of this discovery was just the beginning. Confronted with the undeniable evidence, Dagmar Overby, perhaps realizing the futility of further denial, broke down. Her confession, delivered with a chilling matter-of-factness, detailed not one, but a staggering number of infanticides. She calmly led investigators through her various apartments, pointing out locations where she had murdered and disposed of other children. The police, their initial shock turning to grim determination, followed her trail of terror across Copenhagen. In the apartment on Engavevej, they found not only the trunk, but also remnants of small bones in the stove, chilling evidence of cremation. At a previous address on Vesterbrogade, she indicated a garden plot where more tiny remains were unearthed. The most horrifying revelations came from her apartment on Kærlighedsvej, ironically, Love Street, where police found numerous bundled packages hidden in the attic, each containing the remains of an infant. The sheer volume of victims, the methodical nature of her crimes, and the cold indifference with which she described her actions left seasoned police officers aghast. The investigation became a macabre archaeological dig, meticulously uncovering the fragments of lost lives. Each discovery added to the mounting evidence, painting a portrait of a serial killer unique in her chosen victims and her calculated cruelty. The media, once the story broke, descended upon the case with a frenzied intensity, splashing headlines across newspapers that screamed of the angel of death and the baby murderer. The public reaction was a mixture of revulsion, disbelief, and profound sorrow. How could such evil exist, undetected for so long, in their supposedly civilized society? The trial of Dagmar Overby, which commenced in April 1921, was a sensation, drawing massive crowds and intense scrutiny. The courtroom was packed, filled with journalists, concerned citizens, and, most agonizingly, the silent ghosts of her victims. The prosecution, led by a shaken but determined legal team, laid out the overwhelming evidence: the bodies, the confessions, the testimonies of the desperate mothers. Dagmar herself, though she had confessed, remained largely impassive throughout much of the proceedings, occasionally offering vague or contradictory statements. Her defense attempted to paint a picture of mental instability, arguing for a reduced sentence based on insanity. However, the calculated nature of her crimes, her repeated movements, her meticulous record-keeping though primitive, and her cunning deceptions argued against such a defense. The psychiatrist who examined her found her to be sane, albeit deeply disturbed, showing little remorse for her actions. The sheer number of victims was almost unfathomable. Dagmar Overby was ultimately convicted of murdering at least 25 infants, though police suspected the true number could be as high as 40, or even more. Each count brought a fresh wave of horror through the courtroom. The judge, faced with a crime of unprecedented barbarity, delivered a sentence that reflected the public's outrage and the severity of her actions. On August 16, 1921, Dagmar Overby was found guilty and sentenced to death, a rare punishment in Denmark, especially for a woman. The verdict was met with a collective sigh of relief, a sense of justice, however incomplete, for the many lives she had so cruelly stolen. Yet, the death sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment by King Christian X, a decision that sparked public debate but ultimately reflected the changing attitudes towards capital punishment in Denmark. She spent the remainder of her life in Vesterfængsel prison, dying there in 1929 at the age of 42, her name forever etched in the grim history of serial murder. The legacy of Dagmar Overby extended far beyond the walls of her prison cell. Her horrifying crimes exposed the desperate plight of unwed mothers and the unregulated, dangerous world of baby farming. The public outcry following her trial was immense, forcing Danish society to confront the systemic issues that had allowed such a monster to prey on the most vulnerable. The case became a catalyst for significant social reforms. Laws regarding the care of illegitimate children were re-evaluated and strengthened. Greater oversight was implemented for adoption agencies and maternity homes, aiming to prevent similar tragedies from ever occurring again. Support systems for single mothers were slowly, painfully, put into place, recognizing that societal shame and lack of resources were not solutions, but breeding grounds for desperation and exploitation. The story of Dagmar Overby remains a chilling reminder of the darkest capabilities of human nature, a stark tableau of societal neglect, and the innocent lives that paid the ultimate price. The gentle rustle of leaves on Engavevej, the quiet murmur of the wind on Vesterbrogade, the seemingly innocuous addresses where unspeakable acts were committed, they all silently bear witness to the children who never had a chance to breathe, whose brief lives were snuffed out by the cold hand of Dagmar Overby, Denmark's most notorious baby killer. Her name became a warning, a whisper of dread in the Copenhagen night, a testament to a horror that, for a time, made the very act of giving up a child for adoption seem like a walk into an unforgiving darkness. And though decades have passed, the chilling echoes of her crimes resonate still, a somber chord in the symphony of human cruelty and the enduring quest for justice. Case 11. The biting wind whipped off the Øresund, carrying with it the scent of salt and the distant drone of industry from the Copenhagen docks. It was October 27th, 1987, a Tuesday evening, and the city was drawing its heavy, gray cloak around itself, preparing for the long, dark stretch of winter. For most, it was a time for hygge, for warm lights and shared meals. But in a quiet, unassuming apartment building in Valby, a different kind of cold had begun to settle, one that would chill the very soul of the nation. Jens Christian Larsen was a creature of habit, a man whose life revolved around the precise tick-tock of his daily routine. At 58, he was a widower, his beloved Ingrid having passed 5 years prior, leaving a void that even the most meticulous order could not fill. He was a retired librarian, a scholar of ancient texts with a particular fondness for Nordic sagas. His apartment on Sondermarks, which was a testament to his life. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves groaned under the weight of countless volumes. A worn leather armchair sat by a window overlooking a small, manicured park, and the faint, comforting aroma of old paper and pipe tobacco perpetually clung to the air. Yentz was not reclusive, not exactly. He had his bridge club on Thursdays, a weekly coffee with his sister, Else, and his daily stroll to the local baker for a fresh runstick. He was known in the neighborhood for his gentle smile, his meticulous appearance, always a tweed jacket, even for a walk, and the quiet dignity with which he carried his solitude. He was, in essence, a good man, unremarkable in the best possible way, and utterly harmless. That made what happened to him all the more horrifying. The first sign that something was amiss came not from a dramatic discovery, but from the absence of a familiar presence. Else Larson, a woman as punctual and methodical as her brother, grew concerned when Yentz didn't answer her usual morning call on Wednesday, October 28th. He never missed it. He was a creature of habit, and his habits included his sister's calls. She called again and again, the phone ringing into an empty silence that felt increasingly ominous. By noon, a knot of dread had tightened in her stomach. She drove to his apartment, the crisp autumn air doing little to calm her growing anxiety. The key turned easily in the lock. Another point of concern, Yentz always double-locked. The first thing she noticed upon entering was the peculiar disarray. A stack of books, meticulously ordered by genre and author, lay scattered on the floor of the living room, their spines cracked, pages splayed. A lamp was overturned. A cold dread washed over her as she called his name, her voice trembling, echoing in the unyielding silence. Then she saw him, slumped against the bookshelf in his study, half hidden by a fallen globe. Jens Christian Larsen, the gentle librarian, lay dead. The responding officers from Copenhagen's Politi arrived quickly, their somber faces reflecting the grim reality that had befallen Sondermarks. Detectives Inspector Lars Knudsen and his younger, eager partner, Sergeant Camilla Thompson, took charge of the scene. Knudsen was a veteran, his face etched with years of witnessing humanity's darkest impulses. Thompson, sharp and observant, was still navigating the moral complexities of such violence, her idealism tempered daily by the grim realities of their work. The apartment was a paradox, a scene of brutal intrusion amidst the quiet sanctity of a scholar's life. Jens Christian Larsen had been bludgeoned to death. The weapon, a heavy brass bookend, lay discarded near his feet, stained with a dark, congealing bloom. There was no forced entry, suggesting Jens had either known his attacker or had been taken by surprise when opening his door. Robbery was an immediate suspicion. The apartment had been ransacked, drawers pulled open, contents strewn across the floor. Yet, some valuable items, like a valuable antique clock on the mantelpiece and a small collection of rare coins, remained untouched. It was a puzzling detail that Knudsen filed away. The medical examiner confirmed the blunt force trauma as the cause of death, estimating the time of death to be sometime between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Tuesday evening. The lack of defensive wounds indicated the attack had been swift and overwhelming, or that Jens had been incapacitated before he could resist. The police canvassed the building, speaking to neighbors, but little was gleaned. Mrs. Rasmussen, from the apartment below, had heard a thud sometime before 9 p.m., but dismissed it as furniture being moved upstairs. Mr. Svensson, across the hall, had seen nothing, heard nothing, his television too loud. The quiet nature of the building, and the typical Danish reticence, meant witnesses were scarce. The investigation began to paint a picture of Jens's last known movements. Tuesday had been a normal day. He'd visited the central library, spent a few hours reading in a quiet corner, had his usual lunch at the small cafe nearby, and returned home by mid-afternoon. Else confirmed their usual evening call was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., but he hadn't answered. This narrowed the window of the crime considerably. The focus shifted to whom might have wanted Jens Christian Larsen dead. The answer, initially, was nobody. His life was devoid of conflict, enemies, or illicit dealings. He was a man of routines, not risks. The idea of a random, brutal home invasion felt unsettlingly out of character for the usually safe Valby district. Weeks turned into a month, and the case of Jens Christian Larsen remained stubbornly cold. The initial theory of a robbery gone wrong was complicated by the undisturbed valuables. If the motive was theft, why leave behind items of clear worth? Was it personal? A dispute? A jilted lover, perhaps? The notion was quickly dismissed. Jens's life after Ingrid had been one of quiet, contented solitude. No new relationships, no hidden secrets. Knudsen and Thompson meticulously pieced together Jens's past, interviewing former colleagues, distant relatives, and every single person he had interacted with in the days leading up to his death. They ran background checks, followed up on every tenuous lead, but each path led to a dead end, a cul-de-sac of normality. The breakthrough, when it finally came, was accidental, born not from a brilliant deduction, but from the sheer diligence of police work. Among the items taken from the ransacked apartment was a small, silver-framed photograph of Ingrid, Jens's late wife, which held no monetary value. It was an odd detail, a sentimental item stolen while valuables were left. This detail was brought up in a routine briefing to other units, and it resonated with a young detective in the property crime division. He had been working a string of petty burglaries in the Fredericksburg area, not far from Volby, and in one of the recovered stashes from a recent arrest, a small silver-framed photo had been found, discarded in a pile of less interesting loot. It was a shot of a young woman smiling, but it wasn't the picture itself that caught his eye, but the distinctive, almost antique silver frame. He remembered it because of the unusual craftsmanship, a small, intricate floral etching on the corner. The arrested individual was a 24-year-old drifter named Eric Madsen. Madsen was a product of a troubled youth, a history of petty theft, and a growing addiction to a new, cheap synthetic stimulant making its way onto the streets of Copenhagen. He was a small-time criminal, prone to impulsivity, and known for his explosive temper when under the influence. He had been picked up attempting to pawn a stolen bicycle. When confronted with the photograph, Madsen initially feigned ignorance, then annoyance, then a sudden, chilling flicker of recognition. His eyes darted, his posture tensed. Sergeant Thompson, present during the interrogation, noticed the subtle shift. This was more than just a stolen item. It was a trigger, under relentless, but professional, questioning from Knudsen and Thompson. Eric Madsen's facade began to crack. He wasn't sophisticated enough for sustained deception. He initially claimed to have found the photograph, then to have bought it from a guy. But the details were inconsistent, his story shifting with each probing question. Knudsen, with years of experience, knew when to push and when to let the silence hang heavy. Thompson, with her empathetic approach, appealed to any lingering shred of humanity. Finally, in a moment of agitated desperation, Eric Madsen began to confess. His story was disjointed, fueled by the memory of the drug-induced haze he'd been in that Tuesday night. He hadn't planned to kill Jens Christian Larsen. It had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, driven by desperation and the insatiable craving for another hit. He had been wandering the streets of Volby, looking for an easy mark, a ground-floor window left ajar, an unlocked door. He tried Jens's door on a whim, likely assuming it was locked. To his surprise, it had opened. Jens had been sitting in his study, reading, absorbed in his world of ancient sagas. He'd looked up, startled, his gentle eyes widening not with fear, but with a bewildered surprise. Madsen, already on edge, had panicked. He wasn't a murderer. He was a thief. But the unexpected confrontation, the sudden presence of the old man, had overwhelmed him. Jens had stood up, slowly, calmly, and asked, "Can I help you, young man?" That quiet civility, the absence of immediate alarm, had somehow enraged Madsen in his drug-addled state. He grabbed the nearest heavy object, the brass bookend, and struck. Once, then again, in a frenzy of fear and a desperate need to silence the witness, to erase the moment. The rest was a blur, fumbling through drawers, grabbing whatever he could in a desperate search for cash, his hands shaking, his mind screaming. He remembered the photograph, picked it up on an impulse, perhaps a subconscious desire for a keepsake, something to distract from the horror, or simply a random act in his drug state. He remembered nothing else of value, just a rush to get out, to escape the silent, still apartment and the terrible thing he had done. He'd sold the few small items he'd managed to snatch for a pittance, barely enough for another dose, discarding the photograph as soon as the initial desperate impulse had passed. The confession, though harrowing, provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. The lack of forced entry, The undisturbed valuables. Madsen hadn't been looking for specific items, just quick cash. The brutal, impulsive nature of the attack. It all fit. The brass bookend, with its unique design, was linked forensically to the injuries. Small fibers found on Jens's clothing matched the cheap, synthetic jacket Madsen had been wearing. The quiet neighborhood, the unsuspecting victim, the desperate, impulsive perpetrator. A tragically common cocktail in the annals of true crime. The trial of Eric Madsen was brief and devoid of much drama. His lawyer argued for diminished responsibility due to his drug use, but the prosecution, led by a stern and unyielding prosecutor, painted a clear picture of a man who had committed a senseless act of violence. Jens Christian Larsen's quiet life, his harmless nature, were emphasized, creating a stark contrast with Madsen's brutal intrusion. Else Larsen sat in the courtroom, her face etched with grief and a profound sense of loss. The senselessness of it all was what truly tore at her. The random act of a desperate man, shattering a life of gentle routine. Eric Madsen was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, disappearing into the Danish correctional system, another statistic in the city's grim ledger. The murder of Jens Christian Larsen sent a tremor through Copenhagen, a stark reminder that even in a society as safe and orderly as Denmark, evil could, and sometimes did, walk through an unlocked door. The brass bookend, the mundane object turned instrument of death, became a chilling symbol of the fragility of life and the sudden, brutal intersection of two entirely different worlds. The quiet, scholarly existence of a retired librarian and the chaotic, desperate reality of a young man consumed by addiction. For Inspector Knudsen, it was another case closed, another file added to the hundreds, but the image of the old man, slumped against his beloved books, would linger, a quiet testament to the senselessness of it all. Sergeant Thompson, though hardened by the experience, carried with her the lesson that the most shocking crimes often arise from the most mundane of circumstances, a stark and enduring truth in the silent, unassuming streets of Copenhagen. The wind still whips off the Øresund, but for those who remember, it sometimes carries with it the faint, unsettling whisper of a life brutally extinguished, a quiet, scholarly world forever shattered. Case 12. Gorm Kjær Larsen was born on March 12, 1950, in the small village of Kirkhilling, just a few kilometers from where his body would eventually be found. The eldest of 3 children, he grew up in a working-class family where honesty and hard work were valued above all else. Friends from his childhood described him as the kind of boy who would give you his last krone if you needed it. After completing his education at the local folk school, Gorm followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a truck driver. It was honest work that paid the bills, and he took pride in doing it well. In 1975, he met Bertha Peterson at a midsummer festival in Roskilde. Their courtship was quiet but steady, picnics by the fjord, dances at the local community hall. They married in 1978 and soon welcomed 2 children, Mette, born in 1980, and Lars, in 1982. Neighbors remembered Gorm as the kind of father who never missed a school play or football match. He worked long hours, but he always made time for his family, Bertha would later tell reporters. On the surface, there was nothing in Gorm's life that would suggest he was marked for violence. Jens Christian Nielsen's childhood could not have been more different from Gorm's. Born in 1965 to an alcoholic father and a mother who struggled with depression, Jens grew up in a household where violence was routine. By age 14, he had already been placed in a youth home after setting fire to his school's storage shed. Psychologists who later evaluated Jens noted classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, lack of remorse, manipulative behavior, and a history of aggression. His criminal record was a laundry list of petty crimes, shoplifting, vandalism, bar fights, but nothing that suggested he was capable of murder. In the months leading up to the killing, Jens had been spiraling. He'd lost his job at a local warehouse after attacking a co-worker with a beer bottle. His girlfriend at the time, 19-year-old Annette Mahler, later told police that Jens had become increasingly paranoid, convinced people were looking at him funny. Reconstructing Gorm's final hours, investigators determined that he had left his house at 7:30 a.m., stopping at the local bakery to buy his usual morning pastry. Security footage from the gas station showed him filling up his Volvo at 8:45 a.m. The cashier, Eric Svensson, remembered Gorm making small talk about the weather as he paid for his cigarettes. At approximately 9:15 a.m., a delivery driver reported seeing a man matching Jens' description arguing with someone in a blue Volvo parked near the woods. "I thought it was just two guys having words," the witness said. "I didn't think anything of it." Forensic evidence suggests the attack happened shortly after. Tire marks indicated Gorm's car had been driven erratically into the forest, likely with Jens at the wheel and Gorm already dead or dying in the passenger seat. For the first 24 hours, police treated Gorm's disappearance as a missing persons case. It wasn't until Bertha insisted her husband would never abandon his family that detectives began considering foul play. A critical mistake came when officers failed to immediately secure Jens' apartment. By the time they obtained a search warrant 3 days later, Jens had burned his bloody clothes and disposed of the murder weapon, likely a ball-peen hammer that was never recovered. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Annette Mahler, Jens' girlfriend. Terrified after finding blood on Jens' boots, she secretly called a crisis hotline. "I think my boyfriend killed someone," she whispered. Jens' trial began on March 14, 1988, at the Roskilde courthouse. The proceedings were marked by several dramatic moments. Annette breaking down as she described Jens washing blood from his hands. The revelation that Jens had pawned Gorm's watch at a Copenhagen jewelry store. A jailhouse informant claiming Jens had bragged about making a problem disappear. The defense's argument that Jens was being framed by his girlfriend fell apart under cross-examination. When the guilty verdict was read, Jens showed no reaction, staring blankly at the judge. Bertha Larsen never recovered from her husband's murder. She moved her children to Aalborg to escape the memories, but the pain followed. Mette, just 7 when her father was killed, developed severe anxiety that plagued her into adulthood. Lars struggled with substance abuse, telling a therapist in 2001, "I just want to forget that day." Jens was released in 2003 after serving 16 years. He changed his name and vanished, a fact that still haunts Gorm's family. In a 2018 interview, an aging Bertha said, "I look at every stranger's face, wondering if it's him. Will I ever stop looking?" Gorm's murder changed Danish policing forever. The mishandled initial investigation led to nationwide reforms in missing persons cases. Today, all disappearances where foul play is suspected trigger immediate forensic response. But for those who knew Gorm, the real legacy is simpler: the memory of a good man who deserved better. As a childhood friend Paul Hansen put it, "The forest took Gorm's body, but it couldn't take who he was." We remember that. Case 13. The chill of early summer in Copenhagen, 1990, held a peculiar promise. Long, languid days stretched into twilight, and the city, ancient and alive, vibrated with the carefree spirit of a new decade. For 18-year-old Stein Geisler, the future seemed a bright, open book, each page waiting to be filled with the vibrant ink of her dreams. She was on the cusp of graduating high school from Christianshavn's Gymnasium, a milestone that beckoned with the promise of independence, further studies, and the limitless possibilities that lay beyond the cobbled streets of her beloved city. Stein was not just any teenager. She was a beacon of light, her presence radiating warmth and an infectious energy. Friends described her as intelligent, kind, and vivacious, possessing a quiet determination beneath a gentle exterior. She worked part-time at Café Wilder in Christianshavn, a place where she exchanged smiles with regulars and brewed coffee that tasted of possibility. Her life was rooted in the charming, historic quarter of Tegelgardstræde, a labyrinth of narrow streets and old buildings near Norrport Station, where she lived in a loft apartment accessed by a back staircase, a private eyrie in the heart of the bustling capital. Whit Monday, June 4th, 1990, dawned like any other holiday in Copenhagen, a day for leisure, for celebrations, for the simple joys of youth. Stein had spent the evening at a birthday party, surrounded by friends and laughter. It was the kind of evening that epitomized her life, full of connections, lightheartedness, and the easy camaraderie of young adulthood. As the party wound down in the early hours, sometime around 2:45 a.m., Stein bid her friends farewell at Hodgebro Plads. She was tired but content, the echoes of music and conversation still lingering in her ears. Her bicycle was her chosen mode of transport, a familiar companion on countless journeys through the city. She spoke of going home, of needing to study, the practicalities of impending exams anchoring her in a reality that, moments later, would shatter into an incomprehensible nightmare. She cycled towards Tegelgardstrade, the late-night quiet of the city broken only by the hum of her tires and the distant murmurs of the waking morning. The specifics of what happened next are lost to the cruel passage of time and the chilling silence of an unsolved crime. It is theorized that she made it to her building, perhaps even began ascending the rear staircase to her loft. But she never reached her door. Instead, she was intercepted, surprised, dragged into the oppressive darkness of a nearby basement, a forgotten space beneath the restaurant Tegelkron, used for storage and as a changing room for employees. The abruptness of the attack, the terror of being pulled from the familiar into the unknown, must have been overwhelming. The city slept, oblivious to the horror unfolding just beneath its ancient skin. The next day, the sun, unaware of the shadow that had fallen, continued its journey across the Danish sky. As evening approached, around 6 p.m., an employee of Tegelkron descended into the basement. The air was heavy, still, the usual scent of cooking replaced by something far more sinister, a metallic tang of dread. And then, he saw her, Steingeisler, her vibrant life extinguished, her body a stark, brutal tableau against the damp concrete. She was bound with a cord, which was also cinched around her neck. Her body bore several cuts, silent testimonies to a struggle, to a desperate fight for survival. And on her lower right arm, etched with disturbing precision by what was likely a knife or a shard of glass, was a symbol, possibly the initials PK, a macabre signature. Liquid wax had been poured over her, a final, grotesque defilement. The cause of death was suffocation, 2 washcloths forced deep in her throat, pushing her tongue down, mercilessly cutting off her air supply. The scene was one of unimaginable violence, a calculated act of cruelty that screamed of a killer with a cold, terrifying intent. The discovery sent immediate shockwaves through the quiet professionalism of the Copenhagen police. The city, usually so serene, recoiled in horror. Homicide detectives arrived, their faces grim, stepping into a world irrevocably altered. The initial moments of any murder investigation are critical, a race against time before crucial evidence degrades or disappears. The basement, a confined, dusty space, became a meticulous theater of forensic examination. Every inch was scoured for clues, every fiber, every print, every speck of dust held the potential to unlock the terrifying truth. But the killer, it seemed, had been meticulous too, or perhaps simply lucky. The immediate challenge for investigators was the absence of clear leads. No witnesses to the abduction itself. No loud screams heard in the night. Just a void, a dark interval between Stein's departure from Hodgebro and her horrific discovery. Over the following days and weeks, the police launched a massive investigation, one of the largest in Danish history at the time. More than 3,500 people were questioned, an astonishing number for a country of Denmark's size. Friends, family, colleagues from Café Wilder, acquaintances, even strangers who had been in the vicinity that night. All were subjected to intense scrutiny, their alibis checked, their movements traced. The public, gripped by a mix of fear and outrage, offered tips, theories, and expressions of profound sympathy for Stein's grieving family. The media, too, fixated on the story, the portrait of the bright, promising young woman juxtaposed against the brutality of her end. Forensic specialists worked tirelessly. The bindings, the washcloths, the cuts, the wax, the mysterious etched symbol. Each element was painstakingly analyzed. DNA profiling, while not as advanced as it is today, was still a relatively new and powerful tool. Any biological material found at the scene would be critical. However, despite the thoroughness, the crucial piece of evidence that could definitively point to a perpetrator remained elusive. The symbol, PK, naturally became a focal point. Was it initials? A sign? A coded message? Investigators chased down every lead related to anyone with those initials or any connection to such a mark. But the trail grew cold, the meaning obscured by the killer's chilling anonymity. As the investigation progressed without an arrest, various individuals came under suspicion, their lives momentarily thrown into the harsh glare of a murder inquiry. One such person was dubbed the roller skater, a man who allegedly bragged to several people, including an ex-girlfriend, about being involved in Stein's murder. Such boasts, even if empty, had to be taken seriously. His stepfather provided an alibi, but the whispers lingered. Then there was Mr. Smiley, also known as PK, a 28-year-old who lived in a commune close to Stein's residence. Police knew him for a history of violent crime, abuse, and enrichment offenses. He had spent part of the night of June 4th, 1990, at a bar called Café Floss, also on Lars Jornstrade, and reportedly had no alibi after 1 a.m. 3 years after Stein's murder, Mr. Smiley went on to kill his own girlfriend and hide her in a closet, a chilling detail that intensified suspicion but still provided no direct link to Stein's death. Another line of inquiry focused on the man she argued with. While it remained unclear if this man was ever definitively identified, he was described as possessing a dual nature, sweet and charming, yet also capable of being unpleasant and horrible. He became a main suspect for several years, as police theorized he might have been infatuated with Stein, and his emotional intensity could have escalated into violence. The possibility of other, unknown individuals also loomed large. There was the lunch guy, a young man with short hair and stubble, seen having lunch with Stein the day before her murder at Café Wilder, and the leather pants guy, who was seen in front of Christian Shavn's gymnasium a few days before her death, with whom Stein had a brief, seemingly reluctant conversation after exiting a taxi. This same man in leather pants was later reported to have been seen at the gate to Stein's residence around 2:55 a.m. on the night she was murdered, a terrifying proximity that could not be dismissed. Perhaps the most significant suspect to emerge in the decades since was Marcel Lykaw Hansen, infamously known as Amagermanden. The Amagerman Hansen was a Danish serial murderer and rapist, eventually sentenced to life in prison in 2011 for 2 murders, one in 1987 and another in 1990, and 6 rapes. His terrifying pattern of crimes, particularly the 1990 murder of a 40-year-old woman whom he raped before killing, led investigators to re-examine other unsolved cases, including Steingeisler's. Police found his DNA after he raped a 17-year-old girl, and this DNA connected him to multiple other heinous acts. The question lingered: could he be responsible for Stein's murder too? The Copenhagen Killer documentary series explored this possibility, attempting to connect his modus operandi and geographical reach to Stein's case. Yet, despite the compelling parallels and the terror he inflicted, no definitive DNA link or other irrefutable evidence ever directly tied Marcel Lykaw Hansen to Steingeisler's murder. The case remains stubbornly outside his confirmed list of atrocities, a testament to its perplexing nature. The lack of an arrest, the agonizing uncertainty, had a profound and devastating impact on Steingeisler's family. Their grief was not only for the loss of a beloved daughter and sister, but compounded by the chilling knowledge that her killer walked free, an unknown shadow among them. Every anniversary, every passing year, served as a fresh wound, a reminder of the justice denied. The unsolved nature of the crime cast a long, cold shadow over Copenhagen itself. A sense of unease settled in, a subtle erosion of the carefree spirit that had defined the summer of 1990. The vibrant city now held a whispered secret, a persistent question mark in its history. As the years turned into decades, Steingeisler's murder became a cold case, a file in a police archive, revisited periodically with dwindling hope. Yet, the advance of forensic technology offered glimmers of possibility. DNA analysis became increasingly sophisticated, capable of extracting profiles from minute samples that would have yielded nothing in 1990. Periodically, the case was reopened, old evidence re-examined, new techniques applied, fueled by the relentless dedication of cold case investigators and the enduring hope of Stein's family. There were moments when the media would report a renewed push, a fresh perspective, but each time, the outcome was the same: The truth remained just out of reach, shrouded in the passage of time and the absence of a definitive piece of evidence. The murder of Stein Geisler stands as one of Denmark's most haunting unsolved mysteries. It is a stark reminder that sometimes, even in the most thorough of investigations, the darkness can remain impenetrable. The perpetrator, a phantom figure whose identity remains hidden, left behind a trail of terror and unanswered questions, but no clear path to their capture. Stein, the bright, promising young woman, became a tragic symbol of lost potential, her memory preserved not only by the love of her family, but by the enduring enigma of her final moments. The silence of that Copenhagen basement, where her life was cruelly stolen, echoes still, a chilling whisper in the heart of a city that has never forgotten, but has never truly understood, who killed Stein Geisler. The case remains open, a testament to the fact that for her family and for the dedicated few who still work the file, the hope for answers, however faint, will never fully die. Thank you so much for watching tonight's True Crime Stories. I hope you found it as captivating as I did. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from tonight? And how did you feel about the story? Remember to stay safe, get some rest, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and good night.